My mom enabled my stepfather's cruelty until it cost our dog's life. That night, I grabbed my sister and got the hell out. Years later, she's asking to move in with me after he turned violent again. The day I decided to come back home, I learned that some stuff just can't be fixed no matter what. Daisy was mine since I was 8, a golden mutt with big ears and a lot of patience. She was always the only safe thing at home. When my stepdad Dave moved in, Daisy used to hide with me when he yelled. Whenever mom blamed me for Dave's anger, Daisy would nudge me like she knew better. When things got really bad last spring, I finally wanted to leave home, but leaving Daisy behind felt awful. I begged mom, pleaded with Dave. Even my sister Becca tried telling them Daisy should come with me, but Dave just said, "That dog stays. I'll call the cops if you try taking her." Mom agreed with him. I knew at that moment that Daisy was just another way to keep me under their thumb, so I decided to put myself first. I left alone that night, but despite whatever all the online gurus said about choosing myself, I still felt guilty every single day. Mom kept texting weird stuff like, "Daisy isn't acting right," or "Maybe she's just old, I don't know how long she can make it without you." Becca texted me that Dave was keeping Daisy outside all night and would get mad if Becca tried helping. The last message from Becca stuck with me. "I wish you were here. Daisy misses you." Then 3 months passed without a word. I finally couldn't take it and went back without telling anyone. When I arrived, Daisy was tied outside by the tree, barely moving. I went up to her, petting her gently. She was so thin. Dave opened the door annoyed and said, "You're back." Mom appeared quickly but said nothing, just walked back inside. I told Dave Daisy needed a vet, and he said it was pointless. I didn't argue, just took out a knife I'd brought, cut Daisy's rope, and carried her to my car. The vet said Daisy was starving, dehydrated, and probably poisoned. He told me she'd probably been waiting for me this whole time. I went back home that night, too worried to leave Becca along with Mom and Dave. Daisy and I lay on the floor together like we used to, and after midnight, Becca came downstairs crying quietly and petting Daisy. Mom and Dave were fighting upstairs loudly, arguing about everything. We didn't say much, just continued petting Daisy, who after a few more minutes, her breathing got slow, and she gave Becca one last lick, and then she was gone. My heart broke right there. I stood up angry, took Daisy's empty bowl, and slammed it down in the kitchen. Mom looked from upstairs down at me, shocked. I yelled at her, "You let Daisy die." She started crying, saying things were hard and blaming me for leaving. She knew she was lying. Becca stayed by Daisy's side, holding her collar tight. Dave just stood by the stairs and muttered, "Guess you're happy now." Becca and I buried Daisy under the apple tree, the spot she loved as a puppy. Inside, Mom sat quiet while I packed a bag for Becca. Before we left, I put Daisy's bowl by the back door. I couldn't throw it out. We'd barely gotten onto the highway when my phone started buzzing. Mom, then Dave, then some number I didn't know. I shut it off, but then noticed headlights behind us, a familiar truck coming from our street. Becca squeezed my arm, and neither of us said a word. I kept driving, heart pounding, wondering if running would ever be enough. The truck stayed behind us for miles, sometimes getting closer, sometimes dropping back. I took random exits, made unexpected turns, trying to lose them. Becca kept checking behind us, her face pale. We drove for another hour, zigzagging through small towns. Finally, the truck disappeared. I pulled into a gas station, hands shaking as I filled the tank. Becca went inside to use the bathroom. When she came back, her eyes were red. I didn't have an answer. Not a good one anyway. I had a small apartment with 3 roommates, no extra room, barely enough money for myself, and now Dave was after us. This was just the beginning. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror as we pulled back onto the highway. My heart was still racing. The truck was gone, but for how long? Becca sat silently beside me, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. I had no idea where we were going. My apartment was out of the question. 3 guys crammed into a tiny space with paper-thin walls. No privacy, no security. Dave would find us in a heartbeat. "Do you think he's really coming after us?" Becca finally asked, her voice small. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I don't know. Maybe he's just trying to scare us." But I didn't believe that. Dave wasn't the type to give up easily, especially when his pride was wounded, and taking Becca was definitely a wound to his pride. My phone buzzed again in the cup holder. I turned it back on to use the GPS. Mom again. I ignored it, but Becca picked it up and stared at the screen. 15 missed calls, she said. 10 from Mom, 5 from Dave. She scrolled through the notifications, and like a million texts. I told her to put it down. We didn't need that stress right now. We needed a plan, somewhere to go, someone who could help us. That's when I remembered Ryan. We'd worked together at the hardware store before I moved. He'd mentioned once that his parents had a cabin about 2 hours north. They only used it during hunting season. The rest of the year it sat empty. I pulled into another gas station and called him, explained the situation as best I could without sounding completely insane. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, then told me where to find the spare key. Said we could stay a few days until we figured things out. I almost cried with relief. The cabin was small and dusty when we arrived. 1 bedroom, a pull-out couch, a tiny kitchen, but it had 4 solid walls and a door that locked. That was all we needed right now. Becca immediately collapsed on the couch, emotionally drained. I unloaded our few belongings and checked all the windows, locked them tight, drew the curtains. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "I know you took her. Bring her back or I'm calling the police. Kidnapping is a serious crime." I showed it to Becca. Her face went pale. "He's going to say you kidnapped me, isn't he?" The realization hit me like a truck. Of course he would. I was 19, she was 15. I had no legal right to take her. In the eyes of the law, I'd kidnapped my own sister. Panic started to set in. What had I done? I'd been so focused on getting away that I hadn't thought about the consequences. Becca must have seen the fear on my face. She grabbed my arm. "I'll tell them the truth. I'll tell them everything. About Dave, about Daisy, about how Mom just lets it happen." But would anyone believe her? Would they believe me? Dave was good at putting on a show for outsiders. The charming stepfather, the responsible adult, and I was just the troubled kid who couldn't handle authority. That night we ate peanut butter sandwiches and tried to come up with a plan. The cabin had no internet, just an old TV with rabbit ears that picked up 3 fuzzy channels. We were isolated, which felt both safe and terrifying. Becca fell asleep on the pull-out couch while I kept watch from a chair by the window, jumping at every sound in the woods. Around 3 a.m., headlights swept across the cabin. A car was coming up the long driveway. I shook Becca awake, told her to hide in the bedroom closet. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I grabbed a flashlight, the heaviest thing I could find, and stood by the door. The car stopped. A door slammed. Footsteps on the gravel. Then a knock. "Hello? It's Ryan. Just checking if you guys made it okay." I nearly collapsed with relief. Opened the door to find Ryan standing there, looking concerned. He'd driven all the way out to make sure we were safe. Brought us some groceries keys and a prepaid phone. Said his parents were cool with us staying longer if we needed to. I thanked him about 1,000,000 times. After Ryan left, I finally got some sleep. Woke up to Becca making coffee in the tiny kitchen. She looked better after a night's rest, more determined. She suggested we call Mrs. Carter, see if she'd be willing to back up our story about Dave's treatment of Daisy, maybe even about how he treated us. I used the prepaid phone to call her. Mrs. Carter answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting by the phone. She told me the police had already been by, asking questions. Dave had reported Becca missing, claimed I'd taken her against her will. Mrs. Carter said she told them what she knew, that Dave was cruel to Daisy, that she'd heard him yelling at Becca, that she'd seen bruises on my arms before I moved out. The police seemed skeptical but took notes. He came over after they left, Mrs. Carter said, threatened to sue me for defamation. I told him to get off my property before I called the police back. The steel in her voice made me smile. Mrs. Carter was in her 60s but tough as nails. She gave me the number for the officer who'd taken her statement. Officer Ramirez said he seemed like a good man, someone who might actually listen. I called Officer Ramirez next, explained our situation. He was professional but cautious. Told me I needed to bring Becca in, that running only made things look worse. I asked if he could meet us somewhere neutral, somewhere Dave wouldn't know about. He agreed to meet at a diner halfway between the cabin and our old house. The diner was nearly empty when we arrived. Officer Ramirez was already there, in uniform but alone. No backup, no squad car outside. A small gesture of trust that meant everything. Becca was nervous but determined. She told him everything, how Dave had treated Daisy, how he'd started getting physical with her after I left, pushing her against walls, grabbing her arms hard enough to leave marks, how Mom always looked the other way. Officer Ramirez listened carefully, taking notes, asked about witnesses, evidence. We mentioned Mrs. Carter, the vet who'd treated Daisy. Becca rolled up her sleeve to show a fading bruise on her upper arm. The officer's expression darkened when he saw it. This isn't going to be simple, he finally said. Your stepfather has already filed a report. Your mother is backing his story. But, he added, seeing our faces fall, I believe you, and I'm going to help if I can. He explained our options. Becca could be placed in temporary foster care while they investigated, or she could stay with a relative if we had any nearby. I felt sick at the thought of Becca in foster care, but we had no family in the area. Both our grandparents were dead, and Mom was an only child. That's when Becca mentioned our biological dad, Thomas. He'd left when I was 10 and Becca was 6. Sent birthday cards for a few years, then nothing. Last we heard, he was living in Michigan with his new family. Officer Ramirez said he'd try to locate him, see if he was a viable option. As we were leaving the diner, I spotted a familiar truck in the parking lot. Dave's truck. My blood ran cold. He must have followed Officer Ramirez. I grabbed Becca's arm and pointed. She froze. The truck door opened and Dave stepped out. He looked calm, collected. Nothing like the raging man we knew at home. He smiled and waved at Officer Ramirez like they were old friends. There you are, he called, walking toward us. We've been so worried. I stepped in front of Becca instinctively. Officer Ramirez moved between us and Dave, one hand raised. Sir, I need you to stay back. Dave's smile faltered. That's my stepdaughter. This boy took her without permission. I'm just here to bring her home. Officer Ramirez didn't budge. We're in the middle of an investigation. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Dave's face darkened, the mask slipping. Investigation? Into what? This ungrateful kid making up stories? Ask his mother. She'll tell you what he's really like. I felt Becca trembling behind me. Officer Ramirez must have noticed too, because his stance changed, became more protective. Sir, I won't ask again. Please return to your vehicle and leave the premises. For a moment, I thought Dave might lunge at us. His hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight. But then he glanced at Officer Ramirez's badge, at the diner windows where people were starting to watch. The mask slipped back into place. Fine, he said, his voice eerily calm. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. He pointed at me. You're going to regret this. Then he got back in his truck and drove away, tires squealing on the asphalt. Officer Ramirez escorted us to my car, made sure we were safely inside, told us he'd be in touch soon about next steps. As we drove away, I kept checking the mirrors, terrified Dave was following us again, but the road behind us stayed clear. Back at the cabin, Becca was quiet. The confrontation with Dave had shaken her. She curled up on the couch with a blanket, staring at nothing. I tried to reassure her, told her Officer Ramirez was on our side, that things would work out, but my words sounded hollow even to me. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me jump. I kept the flashlight beside me, ready to defend us if Dave somehow found the cabin. Around dawn, the prepaid phone rang. It was Officer Ramirez. They'd located our dad. Thomas was willing to take Becca temporarily while the investigation proceeded. He'd be flying in tomorrow. I didn't know how to feel about that. Thomas had walked out on us, hadn't bothered to stay in touch. What kind of father does that? But right now, he was our only option. I told Officer Ramirez we'd meet them at the police station tomorrow. When I told Becca, she just nodded. Do you remember him? She asked. Like, really remember him? I had to think about it. My memories of Thomas were fading, replaced by years of Dave's presence. He used to take us fishing, I finally said, and he'd let us stay up late on Fridays to watch movies. Mom would get mad, but he'd just laugh. Becca smiled faintly. I remember the fishing. I was terrible at it. We spent the day preparing. I washed our clothes in the cabin's tiny sink. Becca made a list of questions to ask Thomas. We were both nervous, uncertain. This man was practically a stranger now, but he was our father, and he was coming to help. That had to count for something. The next morning, we drove to the police station. My stomach was in knots. What if Thomas had changed his mind? What if Dave was waiting for us? What if this was all a trap? But when we walked in, there was only Officer Ramirez and a tall man with graying hair and my nose. Thomas. He looked older, more weathered than I remembered. When he saw us, his eyes filled with tears. Look at you two, he said, his voice rough with emotion. All grown up. Becca hung back, uncertain. I stepped forward, not sure if I should shake his hand or hug him or what. He solved the problem by pulling me into a tight embrace. It felt strange, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Officer Ramirez explained the situation. Thomas would take temporary custody of Becca while they investigated our claims against Dave. I could visit, but Becca needed to stay with Thomas for now. They'd arranged for him to stay at a hotel nearby until things were sorted out. What about him? Thomas asked, nodding toward me. He needs protection too. Officer Ramirez looked uncomfortable. He's an adult. Legally, there's not much we can do unless Dave directly threatens or harms him. Thomas frowned. He's still my son. He's coming with us. I felt a surge of gratitude. After all these years, Thomas was still claiming me as his son, still willing to protect me. It was more than I'd expected. As we were finishing the paperwork, the station door banged open. Dave stormed in, followed by my mother. She looked tired, defeated. Dave pointed at me, his face red with anger. her. There he is. That's the one who took my stepdaughter. I want him arrested. Officer Ramirez stepped forward, calm but firm. Sir, we've been over this. Your stepdaughter is safe and with her biological father, who has legal rights to see her. Dave's eyes widened when he spotted Thomas. You think you can just waltz back in after all these years? Thomas stood up, his expression hard. I'm here now. That's what matters. Mom finally spoke, her voice barely audible. Is it Dave? She asked, her voice barely audible. Why are you here? Because our children needed me, he said simply. Because you let this man hurt them. Mom flinched like she'd been slapped. Dave grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. This is ridiculous. We're not standing for this. We'll get a lawyer. We'll fight this. Officer Ramirez watched them go, then turned to us. That could have gone better, but at least now we know where everyone stands. We left the station with Thomas, headed to his hotel. The room was small but clean, with 2 double beds. Thomas insisted I stay too, said he'd sleep on the pull-out couch. We ordered pizza and tried to navigate the awkwardness of being a family again after so many years apart. Thomas explained that he'd remarried. His wife, Julie, had 2 kids from a previous marriage. They lived in a small town in Michigan where Thomas worked as a contractor. It sounded like a normal, stable life, the kind Becca and I had never known. Why did you leave? Becca finally asked, the question that had hung between us for years. Thomas sighed, set down his pizza. Your mom and I, we were young when we got married. Too young. We fought all the time. I thought leaving would be better for everyone. He looked at us, his eyes sad. I was wrong. I should have fought harder to stay in your lives. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to make up for the years of absence, but it was a start, an acknowledgement of his failure, more than we'd ever gotten from Mom. The next few days fell into a strange routine. Thomas would take Becca to meet with Officer Ramirez or a social worker. I'd stay at the hotel, too recognizable to risk going out much. Dave had been driving around town, looking for us. Mrs. Carter called to warn us that he'd been back to her house twice, demanding to know where we were. A week after Thomas arrived, Officer Ramirez called with news. They had enough evidence to charge Dave with animal cruelty and child endangerment. They needed Becca to make an official statement. Thomas agreed to bring her in the next morning. That night, someone pounded on our hotel room door around midnight. I jumped up, heart racing. Thomas motioned for us to stay back while he checked the people. It's your mother, he said, surprised. Alone. He opened the door cautiously. Mom stood there, looking small and afraid. Her eye was swollen, a dark bruise forming underneath. Thomas ushered her inside, his face grim. He did this? He asked, though the answer was obvious. Mom nodded, tears streaming down her face. He found out about the charges. He's been drinking all day. Said it was my fault for not controlling my kids better. She looked at Becca, then me. I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. Both of you. Becca stayed frozen on the bed, but I felt a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. Mom had failed us in so many ways, but she was here now, finally standing up to Dave, finally choosing us. Thomas got her some ice for her eye, then called Officer Ramirez, explained the situation. Ramirez said he'd send a patrol car to pick up Dave, but when they arrived at the house, he was gone. His truck was missing too. None of us slept much that night. Mom took the pull-out couch. Thomas sat in a chair by the door. I lay awake, listening to Becca's even breathing from the other bed, wondering where Dave was, what he was planning. In the morning, we all went to the police station. Mom gave her statement, finally telling the truth about Dave's behavior over the years, how he'd isolated her from friends and family, how he'd controlled the finances, how the abuse had started with small things, criticism, manipulation, and escalated over time. As we were leaving, Officer Ramirez pulled me aside. We're still looking for your stepfather. Until we find him, all of you should stay together, somewhere safe. I nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on my shoulders. I'd started all this by coming back for Daisy. Now my entire family was in danger because of Dave's rage. Thomas suggested we go back to the cabin. It was isolated, hard to find unless you knew where to look. We could lay low there until Dave was caught. Everyone agreed it was our best option. The cabin felt crowded with 4 people, but somehow safer. Thomas and I took turns keeping watch. Mom helped Becca with her schoolwork. She'd been missing classes for over a week now. There was a tentative peace between them, fragile but real. 3 days passed with no sign of Dave. We started to relax slightly, to believe we might actually be safe. That's when I saw the truck parked at the end of the long driveway, half hidden by trees. Dave had found us. I alerted Thomas, who immediately moved everyone to the bedroom, told us to lock the door, pushed the dresser in front of it. He grabbed the flashlight I'd been using as a makeshift weapon and went to confront Dave. Through the bedroom window, I watched Dave get out of his truck. He was carrying something. With a jolt of fear, I realized it was a gas can. He was going to burn us out. I called Officer Ramirez, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. He said patrols were on the way, but the cabin was remote. It would take them at least 20 minutes to reach us. Outside, Thomas confronted Dave on the porch. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but Dave's body language was aggressive, threatening. He splashed some liquid from the gas can onto the porch steps. Thomas backed away, hands raised. I couldn't just watch. I told Mom and Becca to stay put, then slipped out the bedroom window, circled around the back of the cabin, found a shovel leaning against the wood pile. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. As I crept around to the front, I heard Dave shouting, "They're mine! You don't get to take them! You lost that right years ago!" Thomas stood his ground. "They were never yours to begin with, and they're not property. They're people who deserve better than you." Dave lunged forward, swinging the gas can. Thomas dodged, but stumbled on the porch steps. Dave stood over him, the gas can raised to strike. That's when I rushed forward, shovel in hand. "Stop!" I yelled. "It's over, Dave. The police are on their way." Dave turned, his eyes wild. For a moment, I thought he might attack me instead, but then something shifted in his expression. A calculation. He lowered the gas can. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his voice eerily calm. "Taking my family, turning them against me. But you haven't. You've ruined everything." He reached into his pocket. I tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a lighter, flicked it on. The small flame danced in the growing darkness. "Dave, don't," Thomas warned, getting to his feet. "You'll only make things worse for yourself." Dave laughed, a hollow sound. "Worse? How could it get worse? My wife left me. My home is empty. I've got nothing left to lose." He moved toward the porch steps, where the gasoline glistened in the fading light. Thomas lunged for him, grabbing his arm. They struggled, a desperate grappling that sent them both tumbling down the steps. The lighter flew from Dave's hand, landing harmlessly in the dirt. I rushed forward with a shovel, ready to defend Thomas if needed, but Dave lay stunned on the ground, the wind knocked out of him. Thomas quickly pinned him down, using his weight to keep Dave immobile. In the distance, I heard sirens. The police were coming. We'd made it. Dave was caught. It was finally over. As Officer Ramirez handcuffed Dave and led him to the patrol car, I felt a strange emptiness. This man had terrorized our family for years, had culled Daisy through neglect and cruelty, had driven me away from from home and nearly broken Becca's spirit. Yet watching him being taken away, defeated and small in the back of the police car, I felt no satisfaction. Only relief that he couldn't hurt us anymore. Thomas put his arm around my shoulders. You did good, son. Real good. Mom and Becca emerged from the cabin, huddled together against the evening chill. We stood as a family, watching the patrol car disappear down the driveway. The first stars were appearing in the sky. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called. What happens now? Becca asked, her voice small but steady. Thomas looked at Mom, then at us. That's up to you. All of you. But whatever you decide, I'm not disappearing again. I promise. I looked at my strange, broken, healing family. For the first time in years, I felt something like hope. Dave was gone. We were together. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward from here. The patrol car's taillights disappeared around the bend, taking Dave away. I stood there with my weird little family, not really sure what to feel. Relief, definitely. But also this strange emptiness, like I'd been running on pure adrenaline for so long that my body didn't know what to do without it. Thomas squeezed my shoulder. Let's get inside. It's getting cold. We all shuffled back into the cabin. Mom immediately started making coffee, probably just to have something to do with her hands. Becca sat on the couch, looking exhausted, but somehow lighter. Thomas paced around, checking windows and doors like he expected Dave to come bursting back in at any moment. He's not coming back tonight, I said, more to reassure myself than anyone else. They've got him. Thomas nodded, but kept checking anyway. Can't blame him. Old habits die hard when you've been looking over your shoulder for days. Officer Ramirez called about an hour later. Dave was being held without bail due to the attempted arson on top of everything else. They'd found more evidence in his truck, a notebook with our routines written down, pictures he'd taken of us without our knowledge, creepy stalker stuff that made my skin crawl. Ramirez said we should be safe to go home, but suggested we might want to stay somewhere else for a few days anyway, just until things settled. What home? Becca asked after I hung up. It was a good question. We couldn't go back to Dave's house. My apartment was too small. Thomas had a hotel room that wasn't meant for 4 people. Mom spoke up for the first time in hours. I have some money saved. Not much, but enough for a deposit on an apartment maybe. She looked at Thomas awkwardly. Unless you think we should come to Michigan? The question hung in the air. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. Julie and the kids. It's complicated. I'd need to talk to them first. I could see the hurt flash across Mom's face, quickly hidden. Of course, Thomas had a whole other life now. A wife, stepkids. We couldn't just barge in and expect to be welcomed. We'll figure it out, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. One step at a time. That night, we all crashed at the cabin one last time. I barely slept, kept hearing phantom footsteps outside. Around dawn, I gave up and went to make coffee. Found Thomas already awake, sitting at the tiny kitchen table. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. I shook my head, grabbed a mug. We sat in silence for a while, just the sound of early birds outside. I called Julie last night, he finally said. Told her everything. I tensed, waiting for the bad news. That she didn't want us there, that we were too much baggage. She wants to meet you both. Said the guest room is yours for as long as you need it. He looked down at his coffee. It won't be easy. There's a lot of history to work through, but if you want to try, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to jump at the chance for a fresh start, far away from all the bad memories. Another part was terrified of more disappointment, more rejection. What about Mom? I asked. Thomas sighed. That's more complicated. Julie, she knows about our past. It would be hard for her to have your mother there. I nodded, understanding but still feeling torn. How could I choose between them after everything we'd been through? By the time everyone else woke up, I still hadn't decided anything. We packed up our few belongings and headed back to town. Thomas had extended his hotel stay for another week, said we could all crash there while we figured things out. The hotel room felt even smaller with 4 people. Mom and Becca took one bed, Thomas the pull-out couch, and I made a nest of blankets on the floor. We ordered pizza again, ate in awkward silence. The TV droned in the background, some sitcom with a laugh track that felt jarring against our mood. I think I should get my own place, Mom finally said. There's a women's shelter in the next town over. They help with housing, job placement. Becca looked up sharply. You're leaving again? Mom shook her head quickly. No, honey, not leaving. Just giving us all some space to heal. I've made a lot of mistakes. Stayed with Dave when I should have protected you both. Her voice cracked. I need to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet. I didn't know if I believed her. Mom had always chosen men over us. First by clinging to Thomas when their marriage was clearly toxic, then by letting Dave control everything. But there was something different in her eyes now, a determination I hadn't seen before. The next day, Officer Ramirez came by with more news. Dave was being charged with multiple offenses: animal cruelty, child endangerment, domestic violence, attempted arson. The evidence was overwhelming. Between our testimonies, Mrs. Carter's statement, the vet's report on Daisy, and the stuff they found in Dave's truck, he was looking at serious jail time. You'll need to testify, Ramirez told us. All of you, but not for a while. These things take time. Great, just what we needed. More waiting, more uncertainty. Thomas had to head back to Michigan the next day. Couldn't miss any more work. Needed to prepare things for our potential visit. He hugged us both tightly before leaving. I'll be back in 2 weeks, he promised. We'll figure this out together. After he left, the hotel room felt emptier somehow. Mom followed through on her plan, contacted the women's shelter. They had space for her. She packed her small bag, hugged Becca for a long time. I'm not abandoning you, she whispered. I'm trying to get better, for both of you. I wanted to believe her, really did, but we'd heard promises before. With Mom gone, it was just me and Becca in the hotel room. I called my roommates, explained the situation. They were surprisingly cool about it, said Becca could crash with us until Thomas came back. One of them, Aaron, even offered to sleep on the couch so Becca could have his room. Our first night at my apartment was weird. My roommates tried to be welcoming, ordered Chinese food, didn't ask too many questions. Becca was quiet, overwhelmed by everything. I showed her Aaron's room, helped her make up the bed with clean sheets. Is this our life now? She asked as I was about to leave, just bouncing around from place to place. I didn't have a good answer. Sat down on the edge of the bed instead. It's temporary. We'll figure something out. That's what everyone keeps saying. She pulled her knees up to her chest. But what if we don't? What if Thomas changes his mind? What if Mom goes back to Dave when he gets out? Valid concerns. Ones I'd been worrying about too. Then we'll still have each other, I said, like always. The next 2 weeks were a blur of logistics. Getting Becca enrolled in the local high school, arranging for her to talk to a counselor, checking in with Mom at the shelter, working extra shifts to cover the additional expenses. I was exhausted all the time, running on coffee and determination. Mom seemed to be doing okay at the shelter. She'd started therapy, was looking for a job, called Becca every night. They were talking more openly than I'd ever seen before. It was strange, but good to see. Mrs. Carter called a few times too. She'd been keeping an eye on the house, said said Dave's brother had come by to collect some things. The neighbors were all talking, of course. Some took Dave's side, couldn't believe he'd do the things he was accused of. Others had apparently suspected for years but never said anything. Typical. Thomas called every other day, gave updates on his preparations. Julie had cleaned out their spare room, bought new bedding. Her kids, Samantha and Stephen, were nervous but curious about meeting their step-siblings. It all sounded nice, but I couldn't help wondering if it was too good to be true. The night before Thomas was due to return, I found Becca sitting on the fire escape outside my apartment window. It was chilly, but she didn't seem to notice. "You okay?" I asked, climbing out to join her. She shrugged, just thinking about Daisy. My chest tightened. I hadn't let myself think about Daisy much. It hurt too much. What about her? Remember how she used to sleep with her paws twitching, like she was chasing something in her dreams? Becca smiled faintly. I wonder what dogs dream about. Probably chasing squirrels or stealing socks. We both laughed, though it came out a bit watery. Becca leaned against my shoulder. I miss her. Me too. Do you think we could get another dog someday, when we're settled? The question caught me off guard. It implied a future, one where we were stable enough to care for a pet, one where we weren't just surviving day to day. Yeah, I said. I think we could. Thomas arrived the next morning in a rental car. He looked tired from the drive, but happy to see us. Hugged us both like he'd been gone for months instead of weeks. All set? He asked, looking around my cramped apartment. Julie's excited to meet you both. Becca nodded, clutching her backpack. I hesitated. Actually, I've been thinking, maybe Becca should go with you first. Get settled. I can come visit in a few weeks. Thomas frowned. That wasn't the plan. We want both of you. I know, but I gestured around the apartment. I have a job here, responsibilities, and someone should stay close to Mom, make sure she's doing okay. The real reason was more complicated. I was terrified of leaving everything behind, of trusting Thomas completely. What if it didn't work out? What if Julie didn't like us? What if Thomas got overwhelmed and disappeared again? Becca needed stability more than I did. She was still a kid. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but then his expression softened. You're looking out for everyone, aren't you? Just like always. I shrugged, uncomfortable with his perception, just being practical. Well, the offer stands. Anytime you're ready, there's a place for you with us. He squeezed my shoulder. You're my son. That doesn't change. We drove to the women's shelter to say goodbye to Mom. She came out to the parking lot, looking better than I'd seen her in years, less haunted. She hugged Becca tightly, made her promise to call every day. I'm proud of you, she told me quietly, for everything you've done, for being stronger than I was. I didn't know what to say to that, just hugged her awkwardly, still not fully trusting this new version of her. Watching Thomas's car drive away with Becca waving from the passenger seat was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it felt right somehow, a chance for her to start fresh, away from all the bad memories. The next few months were an adjustment. I talked to Becca almost every day. She seemed happy in Michigan. Thomas and Julie were kind, their house was comfortable, and she was making friends at her new school. She'd even joined the drama club, something she'd always wanted to do, but Dave had never allowed. Mom continued improving too, found a job at a local grocery store, moved into a small studio apartment, started taking classes at the community college. We had dinner together once a week, awkward at first, but gradually more comfortable. Dave's case moved slowly through the legal system. He took a plea deal eventually, got sentenced to 3 years. Not enough for what he'd done, but better than nothing. Knowing he was locked up brought a peace I hadn't expected. I visited Michigan during Christmas break. The house was nothing fancy, just a regular suburban home with a fenced backyard, but it was warm and welcoming. Julie turned out to be genuinely nice, not at all the wicked stepmother I'd half expected. Her kids were typical teenagers. Stephen was into video games, Samantha was obsessed with her phone, but they made an effort to include me and Becca. The best part was seeing how Becca had transformed. She laughed more, talked more, she'd put on some healthy weight, her face no longer gaunt with stress, and she'd gotten a puppy, a scruffy little terrier mix she'd named Peanut. Not a replacement for Daisy, she explained, but a new friend. Watching her play with Peanut in the backyard, I felt something loosen in my chest. We weren't fixed, not completely. There were still nightmares, still moments of panic when a door slammed too loudly, or someone raised their voice, but we were healing, moving forward. Thomas found me on the back porch, handed me a mug of hot chocolate. So, he said casually, Julie and I were thinking, that community college near you has a pretty good engineering program, and there's a warehouse not far from here that's hiring. If you wanted to transfer? I looked at him surprised. You've been researching? He nodded, a bit embarrassed. Just keeping options open, in case you ever wanted to make the move permanent. 6 months ago, I would have dismissed the idea immediately. Too risky, too uncertain, but now it felt like a possibility worth considering. I'll think about it, I said, and for the first time, I actually meant it. That night, Becca and I sat on the floor of her new room, Peanut snoring between us. She showed me a picture she'd framed, an old photo of Daisy as a puppy, ears flopping, tongue lolling out. I want to remember her, Becca said. The good parts, not just the end. I nodded, throat tight. She'd like that. Do you think we'll be okay? Becca asked. The question simpler, but somehow heavier than when she'd asked it before. I looked around at her room, at the posters she'd put up, the homework spread across her desk, the little dog bed in the corner, at my sister, no longer looking over her shoulder for danger. Yeah, I said. I think we already are.